So I'll be taking you through BlackRock's challenges, what they've been thinking about for the last 12 to 18 months, and how we've helped them prepare for the change. So as I said, promised to you today, you'll leave having learnt something that will make a positive difference to your digital agenda. For those of you that don't know ORM, I'm only putting 2 slides that are going to be us selling at you. We're an award-winning digital agency. We lead our clients through digital change to give them the confidence to face the future in the industries that they're in. We use data and insight to inform our thinking, and we use that to create strategies, platforms and applications primarily across owned media. So just important, I think, to note that if you're looking for an agency that's going to bump you up the Google rankings, performance marketing agency, we're not your kiddies. We make tomorrow's digital today, and we make meaningful value for brands and their customers. And we're co-hosting today with Sitecore. So Sitecore is our preferred customer experience platform. So they're positioned as a leader in Gartner's Magic Quadrant this year. So their platform is based on 3 principles: knowing every customer and presenting them with relevant personalized experiences, owning the experience for each customer from acquisition to retention, from one purchase to the next, and creating customers for life with one connected platform for each customer. So, who thinks their current website is a combination of things that a highest paid person's opinion decided was a good idea 5 years ago? Maybe content and a structure that people believe their audience want, but it's based on guesswork and intuition. And maybe technology that you've inherited or been given recently by your technology team that isn't quite fit for your needs. You don't have to put your hands up. Our experience tells us that there's probably a few of you. And this is a problem, because you'll now have a digital presence that is a collection of guesswork, intuition, legacy systems, and an old inside-out mentality. So think about this. Would you tell your clients that you'd manage their money based on guesswork and intuition and something that worked 5 years ago? I don't think you would, because no one would trust you. And in an increasingly digital world, it's firms that, if you're not trustworthy and you're not credible online, you're going to struggle to remain relevant. And in an industry like asset management and wealth management that's going through change, it's going to be a big point of difference for those who wish to succeed. Trust is vital. It's the foundation on which business is done. When people trust you, it's easier to do business with them. They're more loyal, they stay longer, which reduces your churn rate. And they tell others about your service, which means they become brand advocates, which reduces your cost of customer acquisition. So helping build that trust and loyalty online is right at the heart of what we do at ORM. So Danielle was going to be here telling you a BlackRock story, but it's going to be me instead. So what have they been thinking about over the past 12 to 18 months, and how are they seeking to address that challenge? Well, their main concern is content. It's content and its relevance. So specifically, they have reams of it. They create reams of it. And it's in different formats and it's in different themes. And they have a huge number of audience types as well, like everybody here does. So their challenge is how to make that content more relevant, timely, and more accessible to their audience. So how do you create videos that are shorter and more impactful, with more onward journeys to keep people on your site, to changing from PDFs to HTML, because this has to happen. We can't keep whacking PDFs on our website and expecting people to use them. And then building a platform that can deliver personalization on a large scale. But to do this, we had to take them on a bit of a journey of enlightenment, and it's a journey that I think is relevant to everyone here. So I'm going to highlight a few key trends and how you can use them in your sector, and how you can take advantage of them quickly. So if we just bit of context. Your audience has changed forever. We, so relationship managers, company treasurers, private investors, high net worths, we're all digital consumers now. And we've come to expect a level of interaction with the digital products and services we use. We think nothing of moving from our phones to a tablet to a desktop to digest information. And we expect a unified experience. So this means every industry has to adapt to this, and they have to do it quickly. Contrary to popular opinion, high net worths are digital natives. They value online collaboration, and 92% of them consider technology as a major source of ongoing wealth generation. So it's only fair that the digital products and services that you give them support that thinking. They're social. 70% of them use social media, and 71% of these guys are going to use LinkedIn several times a week, and predictably they're going to use their mobiles to do it. This audience have frustrations and expectations. They're time scarce, so they're going to expect hyper convenience. They've got more channels, so they're going to expect more relevance. There's more advertising and noise, so they're going to expect you to be always on whenever and wherever they want you. And there's a lack of trust, a real lack of trust in financial services. So they're going to expect and they're going to desire authenticity. People are now used to physical digital experiences too. So these can give us better choice, better advice, and they can be more exciting. So IBM, not Paul's mob, but they calculate $83 billion are lost each year through poor customer experience, and that's in retail. So think about the kind of money that could be in asset management when that's all you do, move money, not just move product. So it's a lot of money at stake here. Some of these guys are redefining customer experience on the digital space. So Burberry used to be known for their tacky Macs, and now they're known as much for their technology as they are for clothes. And that's largely down to their CEO who's now moved to Apple. Amazon have been creating lockers to pick up online purchases, and Argos were borderline extinct a couple of years ago, and they've used digital to completely reinvigorate their business, and they've used it as a differentiator. And click and collect has been so successful now that supermarkets have to plan the way they manage their real estate to change the way stores need to look. We think about some trends. So location-based services, everyone immediately thinks of iBeacons, and we'll cover that in a second. But what mobiles are actually providing us now is this ability to triangulate the phone, the till, and the person. So rather than having to get the phone call from the bank when you're on holiday saying, was it you that just spent £1,000 in that store on a handbag? They can just do it immediately, triangulate, and get on with it. Macy's in New York are using iBeacons, so they're using it to message people as they're about to leave the shop. And this then tempts them back in with a free cup of coffee, and lo and behold, they're going to spend more money. So these are the kind of ways that consumers are starting to see iBeacons. In your sector, I mentioned iBeacons, and actually I think the event space is somewhere there that you're really going to be able to use them. So you could use them to support a richer, more personalised event. You can serve targeted emails to people based on the particular part that they're visiting. You can give them bonus content, maps and speaker bios. Or it could just be to find the nearest person to have a deeper conversation so they can have that face-to-face intimacy. And then you can start to enhance client communities. Social content marketing. So we'll probably appreciate here the need to create timely, relevant content, but sometimes it's not enough to just plonk it on your website and hope people find it. You need to give it ways to breathe. You need to give it ways to be shared and consumed by a wider audience. So you need to give others a chance of finding their way back to your website when they've read it somewhere else. So it can showcase personalities. I mean, a lot of BlackRock's thing is about having the personalities in the business that they want to showcase. They want these guys telling the stories. And it's been particularly successful for the Italian part of BlackRock. So this trend isn't going away, and actually Karen picks up on this a little later. But essentially, with every asset manager and wealth manager fighting for eyeballs on content, not everyone's going to survive. So I'm going to single out the Amex Open Forum here as well, because this was created by a chap called Scott Ruan, and he's now the MD and head of digital at BlackRock. So it probably gives you an idea of how these guys are thinking future. It's a brilliant website. It's for small business owners, and it's got tons of useful content to help you through the challenges you're going to face. So it positions Amex as a kind of useful, caring enterprise. So it might be anything from doing a last-minute presentation or creating better content for your website. So I think there's a huge opportunity here for you guys to create similar destinations, particularly for the growing amount of private investors that you need to serve. So if you can't do all of that, then maybe think about a sponsored high net worth social community or a territory specific community for advisors. Or just syndicate content on specialist topic and sector communities. Self-service. So, I mean, the banks have been doing this for a while now with online video assistance and using reviews in the same way as they might use on TripAdvisor. But in your market, it's emerging with the likes of Nutmeg and Money on Toast. So these guys are serving your private investor base in a way that's much more modern, and it's much more attractive to digitally savvy investors who want control of their money and they want a transparent pricing model. So there's nothing to stop you doing the same. They're making investment more accessible and much more relevant. So I had a little play at this on actually last night. I thought, oh, let's see if 2 million could be a nice retirement pot, and let's see if I can do it by 65. Realised I've got to work a little bit harder. So if you can't go the whole hog, then what about maybe just delivering some service out of hours? Because your clients are interacting across territories and time zones. So give them the tools that they need to make their jobs easier. Or you might create some sponsored IFA or client networks in the way that Amex Open Forum did. Or even video conferencing and screen sharing to help remove the boundaries of geographical location. So those ideas are kind of, some of them are quite forward facing, some of them you might not be able to do because of challenges. And actually, we realised that by working with BlackRock, that there are other things that a digital agency with 40 people compared to global organisations need to consider. And that's the fact that you're at the mercy of large, long decision-making committees. You'll have to consider the merits of global versus local, a central model versus a distributed model, and you have to balance the efficiencies but the idiosyncrasies of countries, not just continents. So, for example, you can't just do business in Asia. You have to do business in a way in Singapore, and you're going to have to do it in Hong Kong in a slightly different way. But you have to maintain that brand consistency at the same time. So, for example, a UK consumer might not want to have their Twitter feed jammed up with the US jobs forecast. So make sure you're providing something relevant to their market. That said, investment is global. So we have to focus on providing contextual relevance. So despite all the challenges, you should be focusing on trying to communicate with an audience of one. And how do you do that? Well, you do it by creating useful, engaging content, and you make sure it's delivered to the right people in the right context. So we know personalised experiences already exist in your space, but that's through face-to-face meetings. And the challenge now is to provide that same intimacy, but through your digital channels. So we have to get smarter with the creation and the governance of content. We have to understand our audience and what they really need to do their jobs properly in the case of advisors, or to invest with confidence in the shape of a private investor. We can't continue to guess at this stuff. We have to go into the field and find out. So if you can segment your audience, you can begin to create the right content for them, and you can deliver it in the right format, and you can make sure it's optimized for the right device. And once you've done that, you can use technology, the right technology, to facilitate the simple use of personalization. So you can set up content workflows that enable the delivery of personalized experience with minimal effort, so you don't have to hire huge marketing teams to do this kind of stuff. I touched on these guys earlier, Nutmeg. And this is a really good example of useful content and deployed like a retailer. So this whole piece here on Nutmeg economics it's aimed at IFAs, and it talks in terms of features and benefits, and it actually aims to get the advisor as far as the cart. So this is good. And to do this, you have to reassess your copy, you have to reassess your UX, and you actually have to start thinking like a retailer to be able to get these kind of results. Make the content useful and effective. Make it easy to consume. Create visual cribs and how-to guides. But please don't use PDFs. I know I've said that 2 times. Stop using PDFs. And make sure they can be read on mobile and tablet. So our research and experience tells us that tablet is the second most common device that your websites are being viewed on. No surprise. That's on the increase. So make sure at least your website is optimized for that form factor fingers work differently to mouse. So there are things that you can do with an iPad designed site that are going to make the experience much easier. So in your sector, mobile traffic, which is smartphone and tablet, is around 20 to 30%. In other sectors, it's tipped over 50. Now there are outliers in your sector that might be 4 or 5%, but that's the chicken and the egg. People won't go to a website that's not optimized for mobile, and that's largely speaking a lot of the reason that the traffic is so low. So don't get caught into that trap that you don't need to worry about it because the stats are low. You do need to worry about it, and it's going to happen faster than you think. And that's notwithstanding the kind of lack of brand warmth that you're going to miss out. You know, people don't want to pinch and zoom anymore. Now, this is an example of how personalization can change an experience. So on the left, you've got a generic advisor's homepage. And on the right, once you've logged in, you'll get a personalized experience. So you'll have webinars, funds, content that's relevant to you based on behavior on the site. Now, this could be explicit behavior. So it might be preferences that somebody's ticked, or it could be implicit behavior. And that's where you've displayed behavior that we as marketers can assign specific values to. So viewing a video or viewing a fund page might be worth more in your eyes than something else, because not all actions are created equal. So rather than aimlessly measuring clicks and dwell time, which is kind of what we always used to do, you need to measure the actions that you and an organization value the most. So that way you can continue to make improvements. And it can be done in real time. So you can start to move people through a unique journey on your website. So our experience tells us that advisors are losing clients because reporting capabilities aren't up to scratch. So perhaps we could create some client reporting capabilities. Perhaps we could create client dashboards that update contextually based on specific behavior, visits, and campaign clicks. We have to look outside of asset management for sure. We have to look outside of FS for really, really good use of personalization. And EasyJet, which is actually sits on the Sitecore platform, is a real world example of personalization driving huge commercial success. So they launched their website back in 2012 to huge commercial success. So they had a target conversions based on their existing content management system of 2%. They actually reached a 22% booking conversion rate. And they do often reference the website as a major factor in their huge increase in market capitalization since 2012. So EasyJet knows my behavior, and it can start to anticipate what I'm going to do next, which means it can then serve content, products, or offers based on rules, profiles, and browsing activity, all in real time. So a few months before that launch, our good friend Michael O'Leary, he was a really happy chappy. He was flying us to aircraft hangars sort of 50 miles from where they were published on a website that was so blatantly deceptive it was criminal. That was until they launched the website. And he was certainly not laughing then, because the true impact of that website became clear to Michael O'Leary and his business. And arguably that's the chain of events that started his newfound love of customer experience and the fluffy Michael O'Leary we see today. So I urge you to learn from the best bits in other sectors to ensure you don't get left behind and take advantage of the opportunity ahead. But why? Because it's difficult. Well, there is a huge opportunity. If you think about this, so this is our kind of, I call it the wall of shame. There are some reasonable websites on here, but not much really stands out, right? And that's because, largely speaking, banks have been slow to adapt to effective digital principles, which has meant, coupled with the outrageous lack of trust to financial services, customers are becoming apathetic. So who actually uses their bank's website? Let's have a show of hands. Now, is that the logged in, or is that the brochure where they're trying to sell you stuff? I suggest that's probably your online banking thing, right? Yep. So that's kind of what I'm saying. So there's no trust, which means there's no real opportunity for banks to cross-sell. So there's an opportunity for asset managers to come in and steal some of the gold, because you can handle our money and you can make it work harder for us than the banks. So if you can focus on gaining that trust, particularly private investors, you're going to win. So I'm closing now. Keep up to date with consumer behaviour and trends. Look outside of your industry for inspiration, because that's where the innovation's happening. Put content at the heart of your digital strategy, because it's really hard to get people to your website. So you've got to give them reasons to come back, and content is the glue that binds the relationship together. Use that content to deliver personalised, relevant experiences for your audience. This is how you're going to stand out from everybody else in your sector. And make sure it's easy to read on any device that they choose. And in the spirit of all agency presentations, I can't leave without an animated GIF. So do it. Thank you, Pete, for that. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand you over to Kareem now, who's going to talk you through his story for Investor.
We all care about the future. And I imagine that many of you here have actually, myself included, have actually made a career out of trying to predict the future. But if I actually told you that I can see the future, then I think most of you would think I'm a little crazy. And frankly, I'd be more than worried about the rest of you. If I then told you that I want to share my crystal ball with you, you might forget how crazy I am and wonder what I'm going to charge for it. That's right, isn't it? We're sort of greedy first and smart second. But just imagine how filthy rich we'd all be if we could actually see into the future. Even on our worst days with the most splitting headaches and terrible hangovers, we'd still be able to make money. So if I told you that I'll take you to see the future, and that I'm not going to charge you a penny for it, then you'll know that I'm totally certifiable. But you're going to want to come along anyway. So I am going to show you the future, and I am going to tell you where you can see the future for free. But first of all, I'd like to tell you a story about how I got to be here, and in fact, how we all got to be here. I know it's hard to believe, but in 1983, when I was leaving university, someone said to me, Kareem, there are two ways to get ahead. You can either climb an oak tree or you can sit on an acorn. Well, as you can see, I preferred to sit on an acorn. And in fact, back then, the finance industry was the single biggest acorn on the planet. Just think about what happened over the following 25 years. A massive increase in leverage, deregulation, tremendous product innovation, the emergence of the emerging markets, and a big increase in client volumes, especially in the hedge fund industry. Besides the occasional death threat, I was extremely lucky. I happened to be in the right place at the right time. In the early 80s, I was trading floating rate notes just as short-term interest rates and credit spreads were collapsing. In 1989, I was in Tokyo, right at the peak of the Japanese stock market bubble. In the early 90s, before there were any neon signs in Moscow, I pioneered the fixed income and derivative markets in Eastern Europe. In 2002, just as the asset class was about to take off, I took over a global commodity business. Between 2005 and 2008, I ran and built $1 billion emerging market equity business. And 2009 to 2012, I ran a global equity business. So any sensible man would call it quits and go gardening. In fact, here is my garden. But remember, I'm a little crazy. So 2 years ago, I chose to set up a new business. Why? Because I think that the coming changes in financial services are going to dwarf anything that we've experienced over the last 30 years. Let me share 2 facts with you. Over the next 50 years, just in the US alone, $1 trillion is going to be passed from the baby boomers to the next generation. We added these 2 decimal points just for effect. And how do you think that the next generation is going to manage that money? Well, we have a clue. Oliver Wyman did a survey and they asked us who we trust to manage our savings. In the UK, 83% of us said that we trust either ourselves or no one. In the US, the figure was 74%. Does that surprise any of you? No one trusts any of us. And in fact, if you're deluded enough to think that asset managers are somehow perceived better than bankers, then I'm afraid I have to break it to you that in the UK, asset managers scored 6%, just 1 point ahead of the banks. And in the US, it was 9%. No one trusts any of us. And besides, in every other industry, boys and girls, men and women, are doing it for themselves. And yet, so far, the financial services industry, the largest digital industry on earth, has pretty much escaped that revolution. So there are three things I'd like to talk to you about today. Issues that I see in finance, how technology is changing everything, and what we at Investor are doing. The problems in the financial sector, I think, are far more deep-rooted than I realized or appreciated while I was in the industry. 7 years ago, the banking system almost caused the collapse of Western civilization as we know it. Banks were massively over-leveraged with risky assets that few of them understood. Since then, central banks have been propping up the banks with easy money while the regulators bleed them dry with fines. About $350 billion of fines, I think, life to date. I don't think that anything has fundamentally changed in the finance industry. I think the banking system has yet to discover its true social purpose, that of being an efficient intermediator of savings and investment. Another survey earlier this year estimates that the small and medium enterprise sector, which accounts for about 80%, almost 80% of all employment in the developed world, faces unmet credit demand of $3.5 trillion. That's $3.5 trillion that could be going to help create jobs. Rightly or wrongly, and Lorenzo's touched on this quite a bit, rightly or wrongly, society has lost faith in the financial system. And what we see all over the world is that when the ruled lose faith in their rulers and the ruling elite fail to respond, revolutions happen. And I think we're going to see a creeping revolution in finance as alternative businesses and individuals take over. The second problem with the financial system is how disconnected it is from the rest of society. How many ordinary citizens have any clue about how the system really operates? The industry has created an impenetrable hedge of jargon that's made it far too elitist. And even if people did understand a little bit more, how do we expect them to make informed decisions when the cost of data is so high and regulation actually impedes access to research? It's kind of ironic, isn't it, that the people who want research can't get it, and most of you get far more than you actually want. So how do we deal with all of these problems in the industry? The simple answer is technology. Technology, I believe, is driving two trends that account for absolutely everything that's happening in the world today: fragmentation and empowerment. They are what I call the yin and the yang of the current human condition. 100 years ago, technology looked like this. Briefly, it looked like this. Now, it looks like this. When technology was massive, we needed large amounts of capital and large organizations. Information traveled vertically up hierarchies. You couldn't fit a steam turbine in your pocket and take it with you. The reduction in the scale of technology and the ability for information to spread horizontally around the world is leading to the fragmentation of all the old hierarchies that have dominated the world since the Second World War. The United Nations, the European Union, even the UK recently with the Scottish vote, the nation state, political party system, the corporation, marriage, family, hopefully in that order, and friendship are all breaking down. Society is fragmenting at every level, sometimes violently. But the yang of this technological revolution is the empowerment of the individual. Not only has technology enabled the broad spread of information, but it's also placed the means of production in the hands of individuals. Each global citizen, suitably equipped with personal devices, can become a media producer, publisher, distributor, virtual shopkeeper, or even 3D manufacturer. The internet revolution has passed through three distinct phases. Firstly, we all got incredible access to information. Then social networks connected us to each other. Now we're starting to use collaboration across networks to create collective value. And I'll talk about that later. There are three digital lessons that I think we should all take from the technological revolution. Firstly, whatever you do, make it mobile. In the next 5 to 10 years, another 3 billion people are going to get connected to the internet via a smartphone. Secondly, make it social. We all expect to be able to interact with each other. It can't be a one-way channel any longer. Thirdly, give your clients choice and flexibility. I think the days of the single provider offering or product are over. So it won't surprise you that when I chose to leave the city a couple of years ago to build my crystal ball, I designed it to be mobile, social, and offering people choice and flexibility. Investor's mission is to democratize access to financial information, bringing together both providers and consumers of financial services on a single platform. Our social purpose is to promote financial literacy and education. We tried to think of everything that you or your clients would want to be able to do, and we designed it to fit on a mobile phone. Let me show you how we've done it. Who here likes to read the news? Most of you, I hope. So would you like to be able to read and to search across 800,000 news articles from the Dow Jones, the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, the Financial Times, Noodles, and Alliance News? Would you like to be able to access research reports on 60,000 companies around the world and more, all in one place, and just pay for the research reports you actually want to read? Well, on Investor you can. Do you like to follow the markets? I hope some of you like to follow the markets if you're in the asset management industry. Does access to 4 million instruments sourced directly from 45 stock exchanges around the world and also a variety of other alternative venues, does that satisfy you? Do you like to set up watch lists, or would you rather use watch lists that we prepared earlier? Would you like to be able to get on-demand, real-time data, one instrument and one day at a time? On Investor, you can. Now, this is a trick question. Do you consider yourselves social? No? No one's social. You're all social, I'm sure. When I get to know, I'm sure you're all extremely social. Would you like to interact with all of the content? That is to say, to like, to rate, to share, or comment on any news article. Would you like to be able to connect? Would you like to have a digital business card that enabled people to connect to you? Would you like to be able to connect and communicate with friends and colleagues, either one-on-one, in groups, or publicly? Well, on Investor, you can. Now, I promise you the future, but I need to ask you a personal question first. Do you like to play games? Yes. Few game players. On Investor, you can play a game that allows you to exchange your views on the direction of any financial asset and see where everyone else thinks the price will be. To be clear, this isn't some namby-pamby sentiment. The crowdsourced data that we're gathering are time and price specific predictions about the future. If you like, it's the signal without the noise. Investor is the only place where you can metaphorically and literally see the future. And this is what it looks like. I don't know how many of you trade currencies and what your view of the euro-dollar is, but our community thinks that the dollar is going to appreciate over the next year against the euro and appreciate quite significantly against the pound. Our members remain surprisingly bullish on gold. Somewhat neutral on FTSE, a rally first and then a sell-off. And maybe that's not so surprising given the view on the pound. When the pound depreciates, FTSE tends to rally. Surprisingly bearish on the S&P, which would be consistent if you thought there was going to be a tightening in the US, which was going to drive the US dollar higher, then it may not be surprising to see a sell-off in the stock markets at some point. But despite that, despite all of their recent glitches, people are reasonably bullish still on Apple. It remains a darling of the market. We currently have predictions for well over actually 200 instruments, and we can easily add many more. So all of us here, in some shape or another, have made a living out of trying to predict the future. At Investor, we're starting to bring that future to life. Thank you.
Suffice to say, I am pleased to be here because one of the areas that we've been working on over the last 3 years, and I'll talk to you about Watson, over the last 3 years has been in wealth management and in financial institutions. IBM is historically very linked to financial institutions based on mainframes and transactional processing, and much of our revenue today is based on that. And if anyone's read the recent announcements, our results were pretty shocking yesterday as we shift, and we're going through a huge transition within technology, and it's a fist fight in the competitive landscape of IT. We're seeing new disruptive companies and technologies like Kareem is showing you, but also we've got the big players like Google, Microsoft, even the Amazons of this world are moving into spaces from books to the likes of storing information in the cloud. So what have we done? Well, we in the past have created a number of different technologies that have shaped the future of IT. We've lost some ideas. We've lost ideas to the likes of Microsoft in the past, like the PC. But we've always proven ourselves to be the innovators. As far as patents are concerned today, IBM is still the largest creator of patents, and in fact, a number of them are based by our inventors, as we call them, down in Hursley. So we have many things to be proud of, not just from an IBM perspective, but actually just from the UK alone, in terms of where we're going and how we're shaping the future. Watson, I don't know if anybody is familiar with IBM Watson. But to talk to you about Watson, I have to talk to you first about why Watson. And the reality is that, as you'll be aware, we're living in this unprecedented world of data. And for a marketing phrase that I'm sure Orm will use, the concept of big data. And the reality is there's an awful lot of information out there. We ourselves, through things like Twitter, Flickr, and a number of other different areas, we are creating this information at a rapid rate of knots. In one day, 2.5 billion gigabytes of data are created, but no one's actually using it. No one's gaining any particular insight from it. And much of it is audio-visual, but a lot of it is text as well, in terms of equity research and information that you use day to day, whether it's news feeds or whatever else it is. But the reality is, on a year, so 2013, 4.4 zettabytes was created. Does anyone have an understanding what that number is? That's 10 to the power of 21. 10 to the power of 21. If you converted that information into text, put it into books, it would stretch back to Pluto and back 16 times. That's the level of information created. In healthcare, the amount of information is doubling every 5 years, and they've got an awful lot of information to go through today. So there's a reason why Watson is needed. And that proliferation of data is demanding us to have an understanding of how we can use that information and how we can use evidence and have, as Kareem says, authenticity about our decision making. Where's our integrity from the data that we have in front of us? And I bring up a picture of a guy. This is a bit of history for you. This guy, anyone know him? He's a Brit, Dr. John Snow, 1854. He would be described as, for me, the father of big data and big data insights. This is a map just down the road in Soho, and these, you don't see bar charts like this today, not as snazzy as Kareem's, but this is a bar chart on a road. And at the time, he's a doctor, and he was looking for to deal with a challenge around something called cholera. Cholera, he thought at the time, and everyone thought at the time, it was an airborne disease. In reality, it was found out to be water that caused cholera. But he only did that by starting to map some of the challenges and mapping where people were falling ill and where people were, sadly, were dying. And they actually mapped it around a very particular water pump just here, down the street. So you can see, and the analogy here is this idea of being able to take information. This is back in 1854, taking information, using it to gain insights, but actually having real meaning, having a purpose. That's what's critical around this. Now, what do we think? Well, from a IBM perspective, now we've just drawn out 3 eras of computing, if you like. The first, tabulation. Hopefully no one's too old to remember those. But that's the fundamental concept of an abacus, or the idea of number crunching. And IBM was certainly at the forefront of that activity, which is why we're called IBM, which is the business machines. Then we moved into the 50s and 60s, and we're moving to a phase where we started to understand the concept of deterministic compute form. That's this idea of if-then statement. If you do one thing, you come out with a response every single time. Okay? And that applies to the iPhones, the iPads today. They're all based on that type of compute methodology. This idea of if, then, and then I carry out an execution. That is what we do today. It's in nice device forms. It's in ways that we like to consume it, and it's always on and we're always connected. But it's still this idea of deterministic. We think we are now in the phase of changing. Compute is changing. And it's not just IBM. Yeah, we're making our statement around this idea of cognitive. That's the idea that we're moving from deterministic to probabilistic. This idea that we start to teach machines how to learn. The idea that they actually start to learn, I'm sure you understand there are machine learning technologies around the market, but we're now transforming that around structured language as well. And I'll show you what that means. So this is the idea of systems starting to learn. Think of it as well for someone like Google, for a company like Google investing in the automation of vehicles. Robotics, you'll see more robotics coming through. From our perspective, we're looking at this in the natural language form. So where did we start? Well, we do something called a grand challenge once in a while. We beat Garry Kasparov at chess, aren't we good? And then we moved to the idea of actually could we compete on a quiz show? And the reality was yes, we could, and we won the show. But the interesting thing here is competing on this show, and it's called Jeopardy, and it's based in the States, and most of us wouldn't have heard of it. But it's this idea of taking the natural language and then responding to the language, not dealing with a Google search and finding multiple responses. But it's coming back in the way that humans think. This idea of having, it could be one answer, it could be another, it could be another. And then basing it on a level of confidence about that response. It's starting to think like humans think. That's what it started to do. Now, I'm going to talk to you about actually how does it really work. And it's this idea as well of working like a human, understanding natural language, but also working and interacting. So for us as humans, we interact more with the computer as if it were human. So what is it actually doing? What's underneath the bonnet of Watson? I won't go into too much detail. But the reality is understanding the natural language form and understanding a question. It is the hardest thing to do for a computer to understand a question. Understand how you don't have context, you don't understand semantics, computers don't understand the semantics of the words. In all reality, language is so ambiguous, and it's one thing that computers in the past have been literally poor at. Think of the idea of putting your money in the bank. That has two meanings. It could be putting money into the bank of a riverside, or be in a financial institution. Drawing the gun. That could be actually literally drawing a gun on a piece of paper with a pencil, or pulling it out of the holster. The language is ambiguous at best. For a computer to understand it, it has to start working through that understanding. And what we have done is started to build on technology that's been around for 40 years and start to pull them together so that computers start to understand like humans, start to understand the question that's being asked of us. But it doesn't just ask the question, it actually then goes into its own memory banks to understand what do I want to go and do in terms of finding the right response and answer. And what it is really, really good at is reading. It can read, consume vast quantities of data. We talked about the gigabytes that are created every day. It can go through 200 million pages in 3 days, in 3 seconds, sorry. In 3 seconds, 200 million pages. And what it starts to do, so it's looked at the question, and then it started to interpret, what do I think the answer is? What's my hypothesis? What do I think the question is asking for? Because the question is not just the semantics and the ambiguation that you get within the question, it's also what type of question is it asking of me? Where should I go and search for that information? So it starts to build a picture of what response it wants to give. But it also, a bit like you and I, starts to work it on the basis of its confidence of what that response is going to be. It's not saying that is the answer. In the world of probabilistic, that's fine. But in today's world, when you're thinking of all the information that's hand, everything that you can see and read, it's got to interpret where it wants to put its confidence. And it reads and it reads and it reads, and then it starts to score the responses back. So it's working like you or I would naturally do to understand whether we're confident in the response. And finally, the key aspect to the system is that Watson, you don't program it, you teach it. So it gets better over time. We had a discussion earlier about the idea of rules-based and decision tree systems that are in place in many institutions. It doesn't work like that. It starts, you train it by experts and it starts to learn, a bit like a graduate. Starting with a graduate, you feed it the information, we call it a corpus, and you start to train it on certain questions and you continue to train this system. So you have an expert system that's only going to get better. So it changes the way that we're working. So what does it mean to wealth management? We started back in 2011 when we did the Jeopardy show and we won. It was only £1 million, and unfortunately I think we spent a little bit more on developing the technology. We worked with healthcare institutions. We worked with oncologists. This idea that the healthcare system has vast quantities of medical research, articles, anonymous patient information. But this idea of being able to connect personalized information about patients and then connecting them with this vast quantity of data to reach new insights on matching treatments, clinical trials where they're looking for new novel drugs to be applied, and Ebola is a great example right now of where people are looking for new ideas and new insights. This idea of connecting personal information with this vast quantity of data that sits out there. And the same can be said of wealth management. As far as wealth management is concerned, as far as I can see right now, we're going through a vast transformational process with many of the clients we work with, companies like the Bank of Singapore, starting to recognize that that space is starting to change. We have people like Investor, we have companies like Nutmeg, finding new ways, new novel ways to commoditize and disrupt the technology solutions that traditionally wealth management advisors used to work in. So what we're trying to do is provide more insight on information and personalizing that information to the individual. So, without further ado, I'm going to take you, and actually Alice is going to take you through a demo. By the way, these things, you should never do these things, live demos. We're going to have a go, see how it goes. Yeah, that's what I've given it to Alice to do. But just recognise, we've brought together a number of different technologies within the Watson Group. Much of it is around the personalisation, getting a customer view. But you'll see in the middle some of the stuff that we're doing. You can see where we have taken vast amounts of information. And frankly, Watson's great at working at vast quantities of data, probably better than it is with small amounts of it. But hopefully we'll take you through and you'll start to understand how you can start to bring these types of technologies to play.
So I'm going to take you through an example here for, as Paul said, for the wealth management advisor built on Watson. Before I begin, I just wanted to say that this is an illustrative example of how Watson can be used in its functions and capabilities. So I don't want you to take any of the investment advice away with you and come back and send me any angry messages saying that that wasn't the right direction for you. So just to say that it's an example. So as Paul was saying earlier, we've got this overwhelming amount of data and information, and as a wealth manager, you could be overwhelmed with that. How do you utilise all this information to provide your customers with relevant advice? They're also having the problem of their customers are becoming themselves more knowledgeable through things like Google search. They're looking into funds and investment projects and understand them and have their own understanding of what they could be. So wealth managers have to keep up with not only the amount of information that's out there, but also try and keep ahead of their clients. So I'm going to take you through a meeting that Tim, who's the wealth manager, he's preparing for his meetings today. So he opens up his Watson wealth management dashboard, and here this is a combination of Watson utilising structured and unstructured data. So it's bringing in information from a number of different sources. So this could be from the CRM system, also from his personal client notes that he has. So it's 8:45 and Tim sees that he has a meeting coming up at 9 o'clock with his client Robert Smith. So he brings up Robert Smith's profile. So this brings together information such as emails that he's had from Robert, any customer notices and also information on Robert's accounts and assets. So Tim sees that he has had a recent email from Robert. If you can't see it, hey Tim, looks like Google is on another tear. Really envying my friend who got in at $120 a share. I don't want to miss out on the next big thing. How about Facebook? Is that a good emerging tech play for me? So Tim already knows that Facebook is probably not going to be a good investment idea for Robert. But he just wants to be able to, when he comes to meet with Robert, provide him with the evidence to back up his opinion. So he goes here to his Watson Advisor. So here, this section, Watson Advisor, has been loaded with a predetermined amount of what we call corpus or information. So this is Watson loaded with financial information. So this could be from the company filings, from global outlooks, from internal, external analyst reports. So this has already been loaded up into Watson. So Tim wants to ask Watson, according to Facebook, what risks are Facebook... Oop, got my caps mixed up there. What risks are the Facebook common stock? Oh yeah. Thank you. So according to Facebook, what risks the Facebook common stock facing? So here Watson has brought up an answer here. So this isn't like a Google search. It's not searching through hundreds of potential answers and providing a list. This is taking Tim straight to one answer. And Tim can go and look to the reference where Watson has brought this up from. So in this case, Watson has brought it up from the Facebook corpus, which is pulled from the 2013 10K. So instead of Tim having to go out and find this information for himself, which bearing in mind he only has 10 minutes to prepare for his meeting, he's able to utilise Watson to find the information for him. Paul talked about how Watson is able to adapt and learn. Tim is able to provide feedback to Watson to say whether he thinks this piece of information is useful or not useful, so that Watson can learn over time to understand the types of information that Tim wants to see. So we can see here that the answer that Watson is giving backs up Tim's opinion on the fact that he doesn't think that Facebook is a great investment option for Robert, but he just wants to check to see if Facebook are going to offer any dividends in the future. So, according to Facebook, does the company plan to offer a dividend? So you might think it's strange that I'm writing according to Facebook, but that this is just so that Watson understands that it should be reaching out to Facebook sources of information. It could be that Tim's might ask for another source's opinion on Facebook, but in this case, he wants to go straight to Facebook's opinion. So you can see here, Watson has said Facebook has never declared or paid any cash dividend on its common stock. So now Tim has the evidence he needs to take back to Robert when Robert starts asking him about whether he should invest in Facebook. So Tim thinks that Robert should be investing in something with more of a fixed income because he knows that Robert is starting to think about planning to save for his son's education. So we can see here further down the dashboard that Watson has investments in considerations for Robert Smith. Paul mentioned earlier about how Watson is able to give confidence levels in the information that it's giving you. So we can see here that Watson has recommended 3 different mutual funds that it thinks is relevant for Robert. So Watson is looking through not only financial information and the financial outlooks, but is also reading through and understanding Robert's own profile and what would fit to Robert. So Tim is able to go into the evidence that Watson provides to see that it matches Robert's risk tolerance, but also shows the sources of information that he can go to fully understand why this would be a great fund for Robert to use. So Tim's going to take this on board and thinks that he would like to offer this to Robert, but he wants to have some more specific details on it. So he goes back to his dashboard and enters Watson's analytics zone. So this is where Tim can go to get more specific data and compare key metrics. So this is looking at more structured information. So he wants to compare the mutual fund that Watson has recommended and see how it performs against other funds. So the fund that Watson recommended is in biotech. So here we have a visualization based on structured data, looking at the relationship between short term and the risk. So Tim can click on these and see which mutual fund that it's associated with. So we can see here that this is the health one, which the biotech fund is part of, and we can see that it's performing well against its peers. But Tim wants to understand more about the risks involved in this mutual fund because he knows that biotech can be a bit volatile. So he asks in natural language, what is the breakdown of risk by fund? And here we see that Watson has brought up the relevant question. And Tim can change the visualization of the information so he can understand it better. In this case, Tim just wants to look at the top 10 funds. So changes the conditions. But he can't see the health fund within these top 10. So he looks to see more information on the funds and we can see here at the top the health one, which I think comes 11th, which is why it's not located in the visualization above, and we can see that it has a risk of 0.94, which Tim thinks is perfect for Robert. So here Watson has been able to not only provide Tim with the unstructured information based on the evidence on why Watson thinks that Robert should invest in the biotech fund, but also go into the more specific data as well. So Tim thinks he has a great source of information and evidence that he can take back in his meeting. He goes back to his profile on Robert to see what else Robert might be concerned about, and sees another email from him. Hey Tim, I'm concerned that I'm not protected enough from inflation. Should I put some funds in gold? So Tim knows that this isn't something that Robert should be currently worried about. But again, he wants to take his opinion to Robert with the evidence to back it up. He goes out to Watson. What is the fundamental outlook of gold? And here Watson brings back the information. Again, backing up Tim's opinion on this not being something that Robert should be concerned about. So here, Tim only now has a few more minutes before Robert comes into his office and wants to see what other information Watson is providing for him. So you can see here on customer notifications, he has an alert on some news articles. So these are news articles that are relevant to Robert's portfolio. So this is Watson pushing out information that it thinks Tim should be looking at and absorbing in order for Tim to have an opinion on new news, so to speak, in case Robert brings up these topics of conversation and Tim could be prepared. So I hope I've been able to illustrate the functionality and capabilities of Watson. You can see here that this is Watson providing guidance to a wealth manager and is able to provide on-demand information so that Tim can provide a more valuable and personalised experience for his client.
Thanks, Alice. Well done. Brilliant. Absolutely no way I would have done that. Thank you, Alice. Hopefully you got indication of the power of Watson and the fact that actually in this instance, and this is only one instance by the way, of being able to use Watson as an advisor to the advisors. Now, having spoken to a number of CEOs who run private banking and wealth managers, interestingly enough, one of the pushes they have is to drive towards productivity gains, and also this idea that actually we don't necessarily need wealth management advisors anymore because essentially the advice is already there. So consider it from a consumer's perspective, right? And saying actually, could I have that information directly fed to me? So you see how we're trying to change the game. Now, so if I can get back to this page without, this is where it all goes wrong, right? Tools. Let me just head back. So there are so many different applications for Watson. We're obviously being very specific about its capabilities around searching research articles, equity research, but there is so much more. And the reality is we are changing the game around what cognitive will mean to our everyday lives, our professions, and transforming industries. This is an interesting one for you to think about. This is from a guy called Carl Frey from the Oxford Research Centre. And they've identified that it won't be long before many roles are automated, many different roles. Frankly, if I was an accountant auditor, I would be very concerned because the probability is there of 94% probability that that job won't exist. The good thing is that for our kids at primary school, if you have kids, they will be doing, the likelihood is they will be doing something different in the future. 50% of the jobs that they do not exist today. So the world is changing at such a fast pace, faster than any other time that we've seen before. But it should give you some comfort, and I have a number of different conversations with media and press, that the reality is that humans do tend to find a new norm. They tend to find a way to adapt and find new value in what they do. What we're going through is a cycle of automation of many things that we thought were improbable
or very unlikely. This idea of being able to understand the natural language form, the questions, and then responding back with an answer with a level of confidence is a game changer. The cognitive around automation of vehicles, robots, drones, you name it. This is a changing environment that we're all living in, and it is transforming the industries that we work in, like asset management and wealth management. So, to finish up, and I think Karim used this word, democratization or democracies. We're creating new best practices for people. So where you've got experts in your business that have run this for 20 or 30 years, you still need them. But actually what you're doing is creating better expertise and faster expertise to those people who are joining your business. So actually it's great value in terms of providing greater expertise quicker. It is going to require a change of thought and concept where we spend a lot of time processing and compute form in terms of dealing with IT functions to deliver, create applications, and work the deterministic approach of compute. And it's still here today, and it will continue to be here for some time. We're changing the model. IBM is asking people to train the system. Experts, not IT people, experts. And that requires a different model of thinking. Asking experts to come out of the business to actually train systems. A bit like training a graduate. So things have got to change. But this is the rise of the future economy. This is going to be the future, the growth of both global economies is going to be based on big data. It's the next wave of technology.